Hello, Petra. Hello, Grant.
Hello.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome. This is the last piece of SalesTech Budapest conference, and there are a couple of questions in connection with these times. I've already asked you in email, and we would like to explore these topics. So I think one of the most important questions is that what do you see that the most important impact of this present time is on business? Obviously, beyond the trivial, spending more time on Zoom and having more kind of a digital life and staying at home. So, what are things that are important beyond these trivial things? Petra, would you start?
Yeah, I think first of all, it is a very. It depends really on the business areas where we are in, right? So the crisis affects all of us in different ways. I hear a lot of echo. I hope you don't have this echo. Otherwise, I will switch in. I probably need to do another talk because I hear a lot of echo on my side. Sorry for that. Why don't you start with my colleague first, because I do have to, because it's not good. I cannot hear anything.
Sure. Grant, what do you see?
So I think I might be having the same problems from an echo perspective, but I will try and make sure that we get through it. Can you hear me okay, Daniel?
Yeah, I can absolutely hear you. It may be myself, so I try to cover my microphone when you speak.
Okay, perfect, excellent. Well, I think there are a couple of things that are definitely areas that we need to be thinking about and areas we need to focus on in these times. I know that earlier I spoke about the concept of remote management, but I think it goes a lot beyond that. I think one of the biggest issues we have to consider in these times is to think about the actual mental well-being and the actual approach that we're taking to engaging with our colleagues and with our salespeople and with our staff in times like this. And so how we motivate people, how we engage with them, how we get them to a point where they're able to continue with their jobs in a way that's going to bring any sort of effectiveness in this time is probably one of the key things that are important for organizations to think about. So how do we motivate them? You know, we've got folk who are sitting at home on their own. You know, they have to get up in the morning. They've got to think about the calls that they're going to make. They've got to think about the tough times that they're engaging with. And it's not easy to sell in these times. So how do we constantly motivate them? How do we engage with them? How do we ensure that they're going to be as excited to engage with their customers as they would be in a face-to-face environment? And so I think you know, the sort of the mental well-being side of things is an area that people don't necessarily talk about a lot, but I think is a very important part of what needs to be in these times.
Petra?
Yeah, so I hope it's now better. I think one of the most important impacts we have discovered is that the role of sales is changing within the organization. Marketing functions have changed dramatically, and also the production in companies is changing. So literally, key business areas or key organizational areas need to be reworked, and that is something which requires a bit of time to adjust for everybody. As a consequence, what we discover is that many people struggle with the amount of change they have to cope with. And on top of that, given that we are all more or less digital these days, and some people are working in a hybrid model, the connection within the team So echo the collaboration within the team are very different and require more attention from the management. So I think within any organization, that's a key area to focus on. So how can we create a collaborative environment for everyone to succeed? And then in terms of the industries, there are industries which are struggling big time, as we know, but there are industries who are inventing and reinventing themselves quite quickly in the crisis. And I would say it really depends on how digital they have been before in order to cope with this, let's say, new normal these days. I think that's the way I would conclude, you know, even um, uh, areas like retail, markets, different markets can really succeed in in these times if they have the right level of let's say, digital infrastructure, knowledge about how to use digital in the new world. You know, I think this is fundamental for everybody.
And do you think that businesses still try to capture the same market share or the same volume of sales, and does that put even more pressure on salespeople or sales managers?
I think yes. I think that the pressure on salespeople is very high these days because they need to maintain the level of relationship. They need to build even new relationships with very limited ways of personal interaction. And the customers are more educated and are more, let's say, critical towards any kind of investment. So I would say the sales and marketing roles within any organization actually do struggle by far the most.
Grant,
I,
I know that you are working
I,
from Johannesburg and you're working internationally. So I don't think that this remote work is something new for you. I suppose you've been doing it for quite a couple of years now. But if you're in the situation, how would you start to motivate the people you're working with? What would be some kind of aspirational or any kind of motivation you would try to give them to work through these pretty hard times?
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, to answer that question, maybe I want to just pick up on the comments that were just made with respect to, you know, is life more challenging now for salespeople and sales managers? And it definitely is, but I think we were on that journey already. So I think that, you know, over the last 5 to 10 years, life has become a lot harder for salespeople and for sales managers. You know, as my colleague has mentioned, customers have become a lot more enlightened with information being so readily available to them. Their expectations of what salespeople are bringing to them has changed, I think, quite significantly over the last number of years. And I think what we're seeing with the COVID pandemic is just an acceleration of the trends that we were already experiencing. And so when you start getting into an environment where salespeople are incredibly pressured, which is, I think, where we are right now, they're pressured because, number one, a lot of the organizations that they work in are struggling from a revenue perspective right now. The COVID pandemic has had a big impact on the ability for organizations to drive business as normal. In addition to that, because they're struggling, often what companies are doing is they're looking at potential new areas of go-to-market strategies, new areas of revenue potential. And so what that means is that often salespeople are being asked to really think about going out and working with new customers, with net new logos. That's very challenging. And so because of all of these things, what we're finding is that salespeople are really being put under pressure. And in fact, what I've been saying to a lot of my customers is that right now, for the very first time in a very long time, salespeople are really having to sell. You know, they're really having to think about how they engage with customers beyond a relationship, beyond a face-to-face engagement, and how they really are focused on bringing value to the table. And so when you ask me, how do we motivate salespeople? How do we engage with salespeople in a way that's going to help them in these challenging times? I think it's all about helping them trying to transition from a lot of what I think our default sales behaviors are, which are very face-to-face relationship driven, and thinking about how we augment those and add to those very specific value-based skills, so that salespeople have the confidence to start reaching out to people on a value basis, and giving them some ways, some tips, some tricks in terms of thinking about how they engage with stakeholders and new stakeholders that they haven't spoken to before in a way that's going to help them stimulate interest and create curiosity. You know, one of the hardest things to do if you're a salesperson and you're working remotely is to motivate yourself with respect to making those calls to customers, trying to get that first contact. And so I think there's a big role to play in organizations in supporting salespeople in that. What can we do from a marketing perspective? What can we do from a blended approach in terms of reaching out to new stakeholders, as opposed to just leaving it squarely at the door of the salesperson? So if we can motivate through providing assistance, if we can motivate through providing help from a value basis, skill capability build point of view, then I think you've got a chance to keep people engaged. People want to see success, and they want to see success early. So you've got to find ways of demonstrating that. And the good news that I have for everybody is that certainly a number of the customers that I work with today are seeing some fairly significant successes. I was working with an organization just recently where a salesperson did a $6 million sale with a customer in Vietnam that he's never met face to face. So these things are very doable. They're very achievable. It's just about how we engage with the people. So I think we motivate by giving people the skills to help them think about how they transition and how they adapt in these very challenging times that we're facing.
For me, actually, it seemed that in the last couple of years, all digital channels kind of became crowded. So when I reached out 4 years ago to any of our speakers or presenters, I almost immediately, or in a couple of days, got a response on LinkedIn or on Facebook or in email or in whatever platform I chose. But to me, it seems that these channels are getting a little bit crowded. And now that we are working from home, it's very hard to reach people in real life as well, because I actually can't send a letter to their headquarters because they are not there. They are actually at home. So the funny thing is that they are working from home. They can't really be reached through digital channels. How can we reach them at all then? What do you think?
So I think there are some ways that we can still reach out to people. I think there's still some ways that we connect with people. Listen, the social media evolution, so to speak, it definitely has its challenges and it definitely has its advantages. I think for me, often the most important thing is that you have to understand that you have to, I think Daniel, if I wanted to reach out to you, if I wanted to engage with you, I think one of the first important things to do is to kind of live in your world a little bit. And what that means is try and understand, from a Daniel perspective, where does Daniel hang out from a social media perspective? What forums is Daniel a member of? What sort of areas does he have interests in? What social media does Daniel use? And if I can start understanding those things, then my role is to actually live in that world as much as I can with you for a while, to try and understand what areas you have interests in, to think about where you're engaging, to get a feel for the views that you have on certain topics. And then if I have the opportunity, I should try and participate in some of those mediums with you, to then start creating an environment that's going to be conducive for me reaching out to you. The one thing that's very, very clear, Daniel, is that just forget about the pandemic right now. Forget about all of those things. If we look at research that's been done with senior and key stakeholders in organizations, their willingness to engage with salespeople who contact them cold without any pre-engagement is fairly low. In fact, it's down in the 15 to 18% sort of percentile. It's not good. And so when key stakeholders are more willing to engage with you is when they've had some sort of referral, or when you can use somebody as a referral to engage with them. They're more willing to engage with you if they know who you are. In other words, if there's been some sort of contact or some engagement first via some sort of social media platform, some sort of an event similar to this, then people are more willing to engage with you. So I think salespeople have to realize that the old sort of traditional cold call, whilst it still might have a place and still may work at some point, is certainly nowhere near as effective as other ways of reaching out to people. So we need to become creative. We need to think about how we're going to find these people. Now, these people may be sitting at home, but trust me, they're not sitting at home doing nothing. They're still engaging in the day-to-day work. They're still engaging in terms of being in LinkedIn and being in all the other areas that they're forming a part of. So I need to think about how I can understand that and live in their world a bit, and maybe use that as a way to start driving my engagement with them. So that's one way. And I think there are other ways as well, but just off the top of my head, that might be an area that I would explore.
If I understand correctly, we need to build some reputation before we can get to any kind of sale. And I think it seems to me, at least, that this reputation building is happening through social media channels and other channels that mainly digitally. And I suppose, Petra, that there are a couple of ways that technology can help us here to be able to connect to our clients.
Yeah, it's actually a good point, Daniel. I think when I was listening to Grant, I think one of the things which are very essential is in these days we can have a very strong, we need to have a very strong collaboration between marketing and also and sales. That has always been the case, but now it's much more relevant than ever before, because we have to make sure that for example, we create digital events, right, with really important content to nurture the, let's say, targeted audience, right? So I think that's very important. So marketing has gained importance throughout the crisis, throughout the pandemic. And the other thing, which is of course in terms of technology, there are technology like social listening, where you can identify what is trending in the social media space, what is trending in certain channels. That is very important, and that you leverage all these this insight in order to reflect in the way you approach customers. A trend which we have seen is very account-focused marketing. So that means that specific targeted accounts that really we assess what is needed in order to approach them with a really insightful communication to them. So there are ways to use, let's say, machine learning, artificial intelligence, social listening software, digital marketing software to really build a better understanding of what your community and your target audience is interested in. And then, of course, the other part, which is very relevant, is to have attractive and insightful content. I think content is very important. We need to have very relevant content comparisons, a more independent, let's say, comparison between, the solution you are selling versus others. So there are lots of things we need to have, which we used to have before, but they are now more important than ever before. So it's all about having relevant content, having the relevant message for your target customer, and then using technology for understanding what are the current trends, what are the current sentiments, the current ambitions in this particular vertical market or in this particular industry or in the specific marketplace. And all this together shall be, condensed in a very good tailored marketing strategy and then supported by the sales organization. So I think the collaboration between marketing and sales has always been important, but I think these days it's absolutely fundamental for the success.
Yeah, and I'd like to add something there, which I think you've touched on, which I think is absolutely critical. So two things. First of all, the targeted side of things is so important. Daniel, too often when I engage with organizations, their approach with respect to trying to engage with new people is a very blanket driven one. So we'll go and just send a message to anybody, right? It's got to be highly targeted. And by that, I mean targeted with respect to the actual individual level. So I'm thinking of a specific person or a specific role at a specific type of company. It's very, very specific, right? So that targeting component is incredibly important. And the second thing that I'd like to agree with is in terms of the message, what people are looking for, what key executives and stakeholders are looking for, are they looking for insights? They're looking for information. They're looking for things that perhaps they weren't necessarily aware of before. So when I'm going to that specific individual that I've specifically targeted, what is that interesting piece of insight or information or collateral that I'm bringing to them that is going to make them want to engage with me, is going to make them interested in wanting to spend more time with me and find out about how organizations can possibly collaborate. So I think absolutely right. And so there's a lot of work that needs to be done, both from a marketing and from a sales point of view, to make sure that it's incredibly relevant when I reach out to that person or that individual.
Do I understand here correctly that sales as a profession, actually two things. So one is that sales as a profession is going from a not very highly trained profession to a very highly trained profession. So if I want to target specifically personally, I really have to be highly trained to be able to think about all the goals that marketing provides me, all the insights I can gather through social media, all the insights I can gather about that specific company or that specific person, and then tailor my solution to that specific goal. And the other thing that I'm starting to understand here, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that sales is moving towards really high value sales. So the mid-level or mid or low value sales is going to be overtaken by marketing if I see this correctly. How do you see these things?
I wouldn't say, I mean, I agree to the first point. I wouldn't necessarily agree to that marketing will take over, let's say, the high volume sales. I think the high volume sales will be led more digitally, but it may still require here and there, depending on the solution, the product you offer and sell, it may have to have also some sales engagement. In general, I would say the role of sales is fundamentally transforming. There is no doubt about it. I think nowadays, when in the past it was relatively easy by just building a relationship to do sales, it is not sufficient anymore. So these days, I would say people need to have a very strong consultative background in order to be able to have really insightful discussions with the client. So I think there's a lot of work required in order to upskill the current sales organizations, right? I think that's what I would encourage every organization to do, to really prepare them for the future. And the other thing is also, I think sales will have to have a profile almost like a general manager. They need to be experts in how organizations are led, how companies are led. They need to understand the processes of a certain company really very intensively in order to be a good let's say, trusted advisor partner to the organization. So I agree to you, there will be a huge transformation of sales. Clearly, the high transactional, high volume business will potentially taken over by some digital sales engines, like e-commerce engines, which could also be which could be used also in the B2B environment, and some marketing campaign. And only for the high, let's say, consultative part of the customer relationship, you will start to get engaged with salespeople or key account managers as we used to know them. At least that's what we are seeing right now. I confirm.
Grant?
Yeah, listen, I think it's a it's a very difficult question to answer, because sales is such a multifaceted environment, and I don't think there's a simple answer to this. I would say this: I think organizations that we are seeing that are being successful from a sales point of view are the ones that are really looking at their sales structures and thinking about how they take a more diverse view of the way their sales organizations are structured. So by that I mean, and I'd like to echo the comments that have been made, they're looking at how do they pass off parts of their sales business perhaps to digital channels, how do they pass off or create inside sales type environments, how do they use maybe some people to fulfill a slightly more transactional team, and then how do they have some folk who are these consultative type individuals that you've been referring to. But I don't think one size fits all. So you may very well find, and we're certainly seeing this, that in large organizations you'll have a very big mixture of those within a sales business. And I think one of the challenges that organizations face today is thinking about how they resource their sales businesses, and how they think about structuring their sales businesses, and how they have a multi-tiered approach to their sales systems that allow them to cater for the many different types of customers and buyers that are out there. Definitely there's a shift in the very high value engagements. There's a shift, and there has been for some time, for salespeople to be a lot more consultative, a lot more customer focused than they have been in the past. And we've seen that shift for a while now. But there still remains a huge requirement in organizations to have transactional based salespeople within their business, because that's a lot of the way that many of their customers still buy and still want to buy. And so, as I mentioned, I think the challenge for organizations is to look at who their customers are, to think about whether they have different types of customers that they're selling to, and then to figure out what's the best way to service those different types of customers that I have. And I think they'll start finding that they have a requirement to build out capabilities from a digital perspective. They have a requirement to build out capabilities from a transactional perspective, and they're definitely going to have requirements to build out capabilities at a much more complex consultative layer. And I think that the challenge then is, so how do you resource that? How do you manage that? How do you make sure that although you've got these multiple tiered systems, that there's still consistency in the way you're going to market, that you're still providing an experience that is consistent across those different tiers? And that's quite challenging. I think there are ways to overcome that. I think sales culture, sales process, sales methodologies are all things that can be used to counter those. But I think it means ultimately that organizations have got to become a lot more strategic in the way that they look at their sales business, the way that they resource, and the way that they structure their sales businesses moving forward.
So it seems there truly is a transformation now, especially in terms of sales structures, departments, and the ways we are doing sales, or we can engage with our audience. What do you think the best opportunities are at the moment?
You mean in terms of sales, or you mean in terms of?
In terms of sales or in terms of business, both?
I think the best opportunities are clearly in having the right mix, And that is, it really depends on what type of business you have, right? I think to have the right level of mix of inside sales, sales focusing on specific markets, or having digital channel, it all relates to what type of solution product offerings you are selling, and what is your target audience. But I think what I have seen over the years, the companies who succeed the best are the companies with a very diverse go-to-market strategy, right? Serving highly transactional, high volume kind of sales, combined with digital channels, combined with a very deep marketing approach. And then, of course, for the higher, larger and enterprise kind of sales engagements, having really highly skilled account executives is, for example, something which has been well applied across multiple industries, right? But it depends, as I said, it depends a bit on the products. But in general, I would say diversity of go-to-market is going to also protect for potential future, let's say, difficulties, caused by the virus, caused by other potential shutdowns, whatever is the root cause for it. So the more breadth of the broader you are in terms of your go-to-market strategy, the better it is for the organization as such. And I think that's what I would recommend to a company who would consult us. What is the right thing to do? I think that's the right thing, to have the right mix for the respective product solution you're selling.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think there's probably, from my perspective, there's two key things that organizations who are going to be successful are going to need to focus on. The first is agility. And so I think the organizations that are able to look at the current situation, who are able to think about what does that mean with respect to how we have to change? What does that mean with respect to our offerings? What does that mean with respect to our go-to-market strategy? What does that mean in terms of who our new customers may be or may not be? What does that mean in terms of our existing business? And then think about how we can adapt and be agile in that situation, and change things to be to take advantage of the opportunities that are absolutely there. So agility is the one thing. But not just agility, I think it's the speed of transformation. I think what organizations need to be cautious of is trying to reinvent themselves to a new perfect that's going to cater for the new normal, right? Being agile by its definition means that we're doing something fairly quickly. And so whilst people are re-engaging, whilst people are redesigning what they're doing from a sales perspective, they mustn't lose sight of the fact that they have to move fairly quickly, and that they have to think about how they continue to engage not only with their customers in a slightly different way, but how do they think about driving new business? How do they think about driving new ideas, new concepts into the market? And so it's agility, but with speed of change management at the same time, and not trying to create a new perfect before you engage around some of those new models. People have to try things, and there's risk associated with this. There's risk from an investment perspective. There's risk from a resource point of view. But I think now is the time to take risk. Now is the time to do new things. Now is the time to try new structures, to try new approaches to market, to think about your traditional market space, your traditional customer space, question whether there are other things that you could be doing. And I think the organizations that are willing to take those risks are the ones who are going to succeed.
I would have one last question to you, and if Petra is still here, then to her as well. So these are challenging times, and there are lots of challenges that are here. So what's the one thing that we should stop doing in sales?
The one thing we should stop doing.
We should stop doing, that we're doing now, but we should stop it because that doesn't make sense anymore and it's useless.
Wow, that's an interesting question. What's the one thing we should stop doing? Oh, I think maybe Well, I think it's maybe this. In most organizations today, I think the one thing we want to stop doing is we want to stop selling on product and price. And we really want to start focusing on how we sell on value and how we sell on solution. And that's very trite. It sounds very normal, but it's actually really hard to do. And Daniel, probably the biggest reason why it's hard to do is because customers constantly force us towards the product and the price conversation. That's the conversation they often will bring to the table. And so it's actually not as easy as it sounds, but really what we have to be doing is we have to be constantly forcing ourselves away from that product and price conversation and really start moving far more to the value-based conversation. I don't even want to use the word solution. It's really more about the value-based conversation. And until we're having value-based conversations, we're constantly going to be pushed to that price product conversation. And that's not a great place to be in because it's going to limit us in terms of our ability to, number one, differentiate against competition, and number two, protect high margins. Number three, ultimately provide something which is highly valuable and sought after to the customer so that we get return business and we start increasing our reputation and brand in the marketplace.
Thank you very much, Grant. Thank you for you both participating in this roundtable. It's been very insightful. Thank you very much for participating in SalesTech Budapest. This was our roundtable discussion. Thank you for both of you.
Thank
My
you.
pleasure.
And thank you. Our pleasure. Thank you.
It's been very nice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.